to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Faro.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier from 4 until 6 in the next hour for you. Up to 45,000 rail workers walked off the job again today in a dispute over pay and working conditions. Their boss, the boss of the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union, Mick Lynch, says action by his members will persist until he gets what he wants. How long's that? The industrial action, the 6th since June. Opinion polls show support for the strikes fairly evenly split. Also, a trip to your nearest British beach mightn't be as salubrious as you'd hoped for this summer. Swimmers being urged to avoid the water at 50 beaches following the release of sewage. Cornwall has been especially affected by discharges from water companies over the last 2 days. We'll meet a business owner who's had to suspend swimming lessons. And our debate this hour, we'll ask, should we reintroduce face masks on public transport this winter? The Tony Blair Institute for Global Change says it's time for a reintroduction of the mandatory mask from this autumn. With me for the next 2 hours, the Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express, Lucy Johnston. But first, we've got the latest news headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Colin. 3 minutes past 4. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The number of top A-level grades awarded to students in England, Wales and Northern Ireland has fallen since last year. However, they do remain higher than pre-pandemic levels, which is the last time students physically sat exams. Meanwhile, UCAS says the number of students accepted at universities and colleges has also dropped, but it's still the second highest rate on record. Education Secretary James Cleverly says support is available for those students who need it.
We wanted to get the grades back towards the kind of levels that we saw pre-pandemic. We've taken a big step in that right direction. 2/3 of students getting their first or reserve place at university, and that is great. And for those students who haven't quite got the grades that they were hoping for, and that happens every year, there's a whole range of support both at school, university and at clearing to help them get onto a great course for them.
The Queen's granddaughter, Lady Louise Windsor, is among those who've received their results. Buckingham Palace says she'll attend St Andrews University. The 18-year-old daughter of the Earl and Countess of Wessex will start her course in English in September. She'll be following in the footsteps of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, who both went to the university in Fife, where they first met. Union bosses are warning that strike action will continue until a settlement is reached. More than 40,000 rail workers have walked out today and will again on Saturday in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. Public transport in London will also be affected by industrial action tomorrow. RMT Secretary-General Mick Lynch says the situation is being made worse due to what he calls threats from the Department for Transport.
He's threatened at the weekend to make all our people redundant, issuing Section 188 forms, getting rid of all the guards on the trains. They want to close all the booking offices in the country so that people can't buy their tickets and get assistance. So there's all sorts of problems and the rhetoric is going up. What I think Grant Shapps needs to do is calm down and allow the railway executives, the managers of these companies, to reach a deal with us in collective negotiations, which I think we could do.
Well, the Department for Transport has responded, saying we urge union bosses to do the right thing by their members and let them have their say on Network Rail's very fair deal, which will deliver the reforms our rail system urgently needs. A 44-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the stabbing of Thomas O'Halloran in West London. The 87-year-old grandfather was attacked whilst riding his mobility scooter in Greenford on Tuesday. Former Labour MP Stephen Pound paid tribute to his former constituent, describing him as a huge character.
He'd sit there holding court in the cafe opposite Tesco's in Greenford, and it was like his mobility scooter was like a throne, because he'd be sitting there and people would be coming up and he'd give bits. When I was an MP, he used to give me lots of advice, and not always advice that I wanted, but he was always there. And such a high-profile, sweet, gentle man who the last thing he did on earth before he was killed was to raise money for Ukrainian refugees in Ealing. That was his last act.
British Transport Police say a nurse who disappeared in South London over a month ago could still be travelling by train and appearing confused. Detectives have issued an appeal on Twitter, saying that Owami Davies may also be seeking to engage with women travelling alone. Ms Davies was last seen walking along London Road in Croydon on July the 7th. Former SNP MP Margaret Ferrier has pleaded guilty to breaching COVID regulations in September 2020. Appearing at Glasgow Sheriff Court, she admitted travelling by train between Scotland and London, despite being told to self-isolate. She also admitted to willfully exposing people to the risk of infection, illness and death. Sentencing has been deferred until September. The mother of Archie Battersby is campaigning for a new law named after her son. Holly Dance is calling for a change to the system regarding end-of-life cases. Archie's family made multiple court appeals to continue his treatment, but he died on the 6th of August after being taken off of life support. Speaking to GB News for the first time since her son's death, Holly said cases like Archie's take their toll on families.
There's been another baby, his life support was withdrawn 2 days after Archie. There's another case that was in court yesterday. It's the stress placed on us by the system. It's something's got to change. We've written to the Health Secretary, so moving forward to see what we can change. I think the whole thing that you're rushed into court, that's got to change.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Colin Brazier.
Eight minutes past 4. Today marks the first day of a weekend. I'm afraid, brace yourself, of travel pandemonium on Britain's railways. Up to 45,000 workers walking off the job. It's the 6th walkout since June. Half of Britain's lines closed, with a fifth of services currently in operation. The Department for Transport said union leaders were, quote, opting to inflict misery and disrupt the day-to-day lives of millions instead of working with industry to agree a deal. Let's go to Euston Station. This not-so-rush hour. The GB News national reporter Paul Hawkins is there. Hi to you, Paul. How normal?
Yeah, it doesn't really feel like rush hour at the moment because only 20% of the trains were running from here at Euston today, as indeed they have been all across the country. Today, the picket lines have gone for today, but there are more strikes, at least in London tomorrow, from the RMT, overground and underground, both on strike over pay and pensions. There's also a bus strike affecting some bus routes in London. That's being organised by the union Unite. That's over pay. So London will be very difficult to get around tomorrow. There is, of course, a knock-on effect around the country from today's National Rail strike tomorrow. And then, of course, there's another National Rail strike, same as today, on Saturday. So there's significant disruption in the capital tomorrow and around the country today and on Saturday. In terms of the dispute itself, look, neither side has shifted. Network Rail have an offer on the table for the union's members, at least a pay rise of 5%, possibly with more. The unions are saying that's not enough, and the terms and conditions you're asking us to change, we don't like that. For example, working through the night. The TSSA have also been on strike today, and they say that the train operating companies aren't at the negotiating table with them. There are no plans for any more talks. And that kind of negotiations really have frozen, and they're saying that the government is stopping them from negotiating any further. They, of course, deny that. This is what Mick Lynch, the General Secretary of the RMT, had to say about the strikes and continuing with the strike action earlier today.
Making demands on our employers. What the employers have said to us is that we want to make thousands of your people redundant. They won't even give us a number, but we believe it to be in excess of 5,000 of our members to be put out of work. They want to create changes to our contracts of employment, which is a version of fire and rehire, because there'll be worse contracts than they've got now. We haven't had a pay rise for 2 or 3 years in many cases, and they want to attack our pension schemes. It's our job as a railway trade union to defend railway workers' rights. I think most people understand that. But we get many messages from the public, from the travelling public, fellow workers, people on our picket line here at Euston, who are saying we're really in tune with you because we're being treated the same way, or we've been robbed of all those conditions. The British working people are not getting a square deal off their employers. That's all we're asking for. And we'll support other workers. People say, oh, why don't the nurses get what you're getting? Why don't the teachers get what you're getting? They'll all be coming into this debate in the next few months. Many of those workers will be balloted by their trade unions because they're sick and tired of rich people, old Etonians, telling us that we've got to pull in our purse strings and just put up with a cost of living crisis and job insecurity, and we're not prepared to do that. We want dignity and a bit of respect off the employers and off this government. They've got to change their tune and get in tune with what working people need in this country.
Yeah, so that's Mick Lynch, the boss of the RMT. Just to give you an idea of how Network Rail are feeling, their chief executive, Andrew Haynes, said today that the negotiations were slow, painful, moving all over the place. There was a lack of clarity, shifting goalposts. We're desperate to resolve it. That desperation is pretty much the only thing that the unions, Network Rail, the train operating companies and the government have in common. And with, as Mick Lynch was alluding to there, there's potential industrial action from nurses, from teachers. We know that Royal Mail workers are going on strike as well. So a whole range of sectors of the economy could be taking industrial action. So this strike action is going to become very much a big issue, an even bigger issue, I should say, in the coming months.
That's Paul Hawkins at Euston for us this afternoon. Paul, thanks for your time. Thanks a lot. The transport journalist and author Christian Woolmar joins us now. Christian Woolmar, welcome to you. I was looking at some data today showing traffic volume, so cars on the streets of London. And because we live in a world of things like Google Maps and people having GPS effectively built into their phones, we've got a pretty accurate picture now of what's happening on the roads. And you'd expect, since nothing's running on the rails, the roads would be packed. Actually, it was sort of 2 or 3% higher in terms of traffic volumes. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, whether Grant Shapps was right at the beginning, the first strike, when he said, actually, these train strikers are in danger of creating a long-term problem for the railways because people now have an alternative in the form of Teams or Zoom or Skype.
Yes, I noticed the same. I cycled into the city earlier today and out again, and there was hardly anybody there at all. And the traffic was certainly lower than usual. But no, I'm afraid I think we're still going to need the railways, very, very much so. I'm very pleased that we're going to need the railways because, there's just so much Zoom and Teams you can do. And I must say, after 2 years of it, I'm pretty thoroughly sick of it. And a lot of my colleagues in my fellow journalists are also pretty sick of it. And lots of people are coming back into the office. And there's this odd thing that the railways are now getting more leisure travellers than they did before. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is the high fuel prices. But again, I've been to Margate recently, I've been to Wales. All those journeys were on packed trains. So the trains are actually changing in how they're being used. They're being used by leisure passengers rather than commuters.
Interesting point. Just in terms of the nature of this industrial action and where it goes next. I mentioned we've had half a dozen since June. I think I'm surprised by that figure. It doesn't feel like we've had that many, but that's what I read. We've got the union saying we'll carry on until something gives. The government don't look particularly inclined to give any ground, so it's a resistible force versus immovable object. How long might this go on for, do you think?
Well, I said when I was interviewed on your programme and on other programmes in July that, I thought this was going to go into the winter. The fundamental problem, Colin, is this, which is that in a normal situation, the trade unions would be able to negotiate with the people who can make decisions over what pay conditions they're going to get. And in this case, there is, yes, Network Rail, but that's only one part of the dispute. The other part is with the train operators. And there it is the government who would have to sanction any pay rises by the train operators. And it's clear that Grant Shapps is just not interested in doing that. But when I talk to railway managers, they say, look, our hands are tied. We can't make any offers to these trade unions. They haven't even put an offer on the table. Part of this dispute today is with Network Rail, but part is with some 14 train operating companies. And the unions have not even had an offer from them. They've had an offer from Network Rail, as you said earlier, but not from the train operators. So really it's up to Grant Shapps. And the only thing we have to wait for is to expect that somebody will replace Grant Shapps and they'll be more prepared to take some sort of conciliatory tone and work out a settlement, because the unions are not asking for 10 or 13%. They're just asking for some extra money, which will help them in this cost of living crisis.
Christian Woolmar, as ever, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Let's get the thoughts of the Health and Social Affairs editor at the Sunday Express, Lucy Johnson, who's going to stray slightly from her area of expertise and talk about railways. There is a point, I don't know where it is, and I don't know whether we've reached it yet, a tipping point where public exasperation starts to grow to such a point where the unions think we've lost the public on this. I'm not sure we're there yet.
No, it's difficult to tell what the public feel, and I think lots of people have a justifiable cause to argue for increased pay, increased conditions. We've got the nurses, we've got we've got people that came out in the pandemic and worked, and they all have grounds. But obviously the rail workers have a strong union and can hold us to ransom in that way. So it's a difficult and thorny problem. I can't see.
You say hold us to ransom in that way. I would say in a way that's different from how they used to be able to hold our feet to the fire, because of the point I made there. Actually, it's not a point I've made. It's a point that Grant Shapps made weeks ago, that actually people now have the option, and they're using it, of working from home.
Exactly, and I think that's a great shame. I think for younger people, they need peer-to-peer learning in the office, productivity. There's lots of evidence to show that one is much more productive when you're in the office. We are losing the plot as a nation. We are eating more, drinking more, taking more sugar, exercising less. The whole lockdown had a massive effect. We've got more people retiring. I think we lost about 20% of the passengers. We're still down on 20% of passengers who haven't gone back. And I think it makes for a less healthy economy. So I feel, as Christian was saying earlier, I'm sick of Zoom, face-to-face. It's in our DNA. We should be meeting people. And obviously, in the creative industry, it's much more important. It does depend on the actual job you're doing. But I think we've lost a lot by using tech. And it would never have happened had we not got the tech.
And I know you've got some strong views on lockdown, what legacy it's left us. So, but we'll come to that in a moment. Lucy, thanks very much indeed for now. Here's a question. Can we have our cake and eat it? Apparently not, at least not when it comes to tax cuts. The highly regarded Institute for Fiscal Studies says neither Liz Truss nor Rishi Sunak are being realistic about their plans to cut taxes. Well, why? Because, says the IFS, tax cuts can only work if they happen alongside spending cuts. Liz Truss has pledged to scrap April's national insurance rise to help households cancel a planned rise in corporation tax, or would cancel a planned rise in corporation tax. Rishi Sunak, on the other hand, he's vowed to cut 3p off income tax by the end of 2029. Both candidates say their plans are affordable, but the IFS, Institute for Fiscal Studies, has argued large permanent tax cuts could put pressure on the public coffers. Let's turn to Elliot Keck, the investigations campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Elliot, thanks for your time. Thanks for coming in. This does seem to be a fault line between the two candidates. Rishi Sunak seems more inclined to say, to mouth that old Thatcherite verity, that if you want tax cuts, something's got to give.
Well, I think so. Both candidates, they both have their flaws on this point. I don't think Rishi Sunak takes into account the impact that tax cuts can have on economic growth and investment. And I think he puts those to one side too easily. But I think, on the other hand, I think Liz Truss also does have an issue with the need to get the cost of government crisis under control. So I think both candidates areas of fiscal policy.
The state's bloated. I think, the biggest tax burden for 70 years. We've got to look at public spending. We'll look at the public sector. We might think that, but I don't get the sense the general public have an appetite for swinging cuts in public services, have they?
Well, it's really interesting. You were talking about the Institute for Fiscal Studies paper that came out today, and they made a point that broadly we make, that tax cuts need to come with concomitant spending cuts. But there were some issues with the IFS paper, I think, that do suggest that maybe there is more remit for tax cuts than may be allowed in some quarters. So the IFS actually doesn't change its mind on the overall fiscal headroom that the next Prime Minister will have. So it still expects the budget to be in surplus by about £30 billion by 2024 to 25. So there is actually that £30 billion to play with. And we think that £30 billion could fund probably a couple of pennies off income tax, a VAT cut, and maybe an end to the national insurance rise. So there is more fiscal headroom than some people give credit for. But that doesn't mean that the cost of government doesn't also need to be brought under control.
Funnily enough, £30 billion is the amount that Labour says it would cost for 6 months to cap fuel bills. I mean, £30 billion sounds like a lot, but actually, given the fuel crisis, it could be used up pretty quickly. And I just want, 2p off income tax. It sounds, it's very, very eye-catching. But what practical difference to the health of the economy would it make?
Well, listen, in the short term, there clearly needs to be some direct help for particularly some of the lowest income households. There's no doubt about that. In the short term, people are facing a real emergency. But one of the problems we have in this country, and energy is a really good point on this, is that we don't have a long-term view of the economy. And we saw that with Nick Clegg's completely absurd video in 2010, where he said he's opposing nuclear energy because it won't come online until 2022. And it's now 2022, and lo and behold, we could really do without energy. So the thing with tax cuts is they may not help everyone right now, but what it will mean is a huge boom in economic investment and prosperity that will take longer to filter through, but will mean a larger economy in the long term.
I just wonder whether you feel you've lost that essential argument. It seems to me that your side, and I dare say it's not the side of the argument I agree with, that actually people are quite comfortable with money being taken from them in taxes, given to a third party, and it then comes back to them in the form of grants. We should be cutting out the middleman more often, shouldn't we?
Well, I think the problem is people have been so used to that for decades that they think that the only way, some people think that the only way that they can get access to help and support is through these government schemes, because they've almost forgotten what it's like to take home the bulk of their own income. So I think, there's an argument still to be had, but I think the problem is people have become very used to this very, very, very bloated government.
Elliot, for now, thanks very much indeed. Lucy Johnson, are you a tax cutter? Would you? Put you on the spot? Where do you stand on this?
It depends whether those tax cuts are going to have that trickle-down effect in stimulating the economy, and presumably that's what they want to do. But if you're not, most people, a large proportion of the population don't pay tax at all. You will know probably. I think it's almost 50% or something near there. So they're the poorest people. So any tax cut's not going to help them. And are the classes or the people that are paying tax, are they going to put their money away in savings because they're worried about the economic state that we're in? So it
can I just make a really unfashionable point, Lucy? Of course, we all should be sympathetic to people who are in the worst financial straits. nobody ever stands up, for obvious reasons, and you know this, Elliot, don't you, for the 1%, the richest 1% who pay, what is it, 28% of all income tax?
Yeah, about 28%.
What should they be paying? I mean, that's, nearly a third of the tax take comes from our richest 1%. And if you squeeze the pips much more, maybe we'll see what happened in the 1970s and there'll be a brain drain, they'll take the cash somewhere else.
But will they even notice these tax cuts? I mean, that's the question. They will notice it less. And the people that are in, as you said, a real emergency now, are in a real emergency now. And if we don't help them, then it will end up potentially costing more on our services, our health services, our drink-related, all the things that our social support services. So it's even on an economic basis, one could argue that it's not an ideal solution. And we need to be, Rishi's got the idea that we also need to be thinking about poorer people too.
OK. Lucy, Elliot, thanks both very much indeed. You're with Colin Brazier. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, swimmers being urged to avoid some popular beaches in parts of the country, especially in the southwest. Several water companies releasing our old friend untreated wastewater on Britain's coastlines. We'll speak to an open water swimming coach whose business has been really badly affected. Back in a tick.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Keep your emails coming in. Now, swimmers are being urged to avoid more than 50 beaches across England and Wales because of raw sewage that has been pumped just off the shoreline into the sea. Beaches in East Sussex, for instance, they were closed today. Untreated wastewater released into the sea at the shoreline. Significant electrical problems at a nearby pumping station. They were blamed for the closure of Bexhill and Normans Bay beaches. Southern Water said the firm was deeply sorry as it understood the distress this causes. Here's an open water swimming coach, Hannah Waller, who can talk about how this affects things and indeed her business. Hannah, welcome to you. How does it affect your business, if at all?
It affects my business considerably, actually, being that I'm an open water coach and I like to swim in the seas around the coast where I am. So, yeah, it's had a huge effect on my business.
Can you see it, Hannah? Can you smell it?
In some areas, yes. In other areas, not so bad. You can definitely tell the colour of the water has changed, but you can't necessarily smell it, no.
Yeah, so, I mean, in terms of knowing it's there, I mean, are you relying on the warnings from the water companies, or do people say, or is it something that's observable locally?
Yeah, so we rely on the Environment Agency reports, and also I use the Surfers Against Sewage app to show when the pumping stations have made these storm discharges. But in all honesty, we're fairly used to it now. Unfortunately, it's become quite a regular occurrence when we get heavy rain. We expect these storm discharges and sewage to be released into our rivers and sea.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a difficult question in a sense, but where the sewage that's been washed out, is it coming from the hinterland? Is it coming from miles inland? Is it just a local coastal village that's where it's coming from? It feels rude to be prying into this stuff, but it gives us a picture of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think it depends how close the villages in the coast are to the pumping stations. Like where I live in Newquay, we've got 3 pumping stations within the space of like 5 miles, which is really close. So it's going to all be local stuff, runoff from the town and the villages nearby, and they're all going to be filtering into these pumping stations. And with the heavy rainfall as well, it makes it worse. But there is sewage in that as well, just because our systems just can't handle it. They just can't deal with that amount coming out at once.
There's been such a fashion, I'm sure you've done it for many years, but it's unquestionably become a fashion, hasn't it, open water swimming? And I'm sure you'd be disappointed, to put it mildly, to think that it's potentially jeopardised by things like this.
Yeah, massively. And it's not just open water swimming either. There's lots of other water users, supping, being on the boats and fishing and stuff like that as well. We're all affected. Anybody that lives by the coast, whether you're in the water or not, you're affected by this. And something really needs to be done about it.
Hannah Waller, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Lucy Johnston is alongside me for the next hour and a half or thereabouts from the Sunday Express. What do you make of this?
Well, I think we've got to look at the water companies. On the one hand, I think a large number of them are owned by very wealthy foreign investors. I think they pay about 60 billion in debts. We have a dilapidated infrastructure, and the regulator may be putting out fines now and again, but it's they're pretty much...
It came as a shock to people, Lucy. It came as a shock to people to find out just how many of our water companies are owned by foreign investors. With the right regulator, the right regulation, that need not necessarily be a problem, you could argue.
Seem to be asleep at the wheel, I think, at the moment. Not doing... Well, even if they are doing something, it's not having an effect. But we do have an infrastructure that is based on Victorian pipes, iron cast pipes and plastics. They're not working so well anymore.
Well, I tell you one of the reasons they don't work so well anymore, the Victorian sewers, and again, just to be slightly devil's advocate, do a bit of devil's advocacy. We've got nearly 20 million more people in the last 20 years.
Absolutely.
Flushing their loos and all the rest of it. So, yes, it's decaying. Yes, we got there first with a lot of it. But yes, that means it's older and is decaying. But actually, it's getting a lot more punished than it used to.
Yeah, and there's urban creep. And it's not just sewage. There's microplastics, laundry waste. There's all sorts of chemicals in the water that, people have concerns about. There are places, and there's a big move to have sort of sustainable, more porous areas for water to flow away. I mean, it's a big and very complicated subject, but it's not being tackled at all. And this just carries on. I think there was something like over 3,000 sewage alerts last year, and every year it happens, and it seems to get worse. So it's not being tackled, and it needs to be looked into.
OK, Lucy, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up after the break in our Speaker's Corner, today it's proving to be a very popular feature, and rightly so. Lucy's going to be sharing her thoughts as to why, she's doing her hair. Come back to me. Dangers of TV. Why Britain is failing our children, in particular in relation to lockdown. Our debate too this hour will ask, should we reintroduce face masks on public transport this autumn? The Tony Blair Institute for Global Change says we really should do. What do you think? Let's bring you the latest news headlines first with Ray.
Thanks, Colin. It's 4:35. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The number of top A-level grades awarded to students in England, Wales and Northern Ireland has fallen since last year. They do, however, remain higher than pre-pandemic levels. That's the last time students physically sat exams. Meanwhile, UCAS says the number of students accepted at universities and colleges has also dropped, but it's still the second highest rate on record. The Queen's granddaughter, Lady Louise Windsor, is among those who've received their results. Buckingham Palace says she'll attend St Andrews University. The 18-year-old daughter of the Earl and Countess of Wessex will start her course in English in September. She'll follow in the footsteps of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, who both went to the university in Fife, where they first met. The Secretary-General of the RMT Union says there'll be waves of public sector workers joining in with strike action amid rising inflation and falling wages. Rail, tube and bus passengers face further travel disruption amid 3 days of industrial action. 80% of train services are affected today as more than 40,000 workers walked out in a dispute over pay and conditions. British Transport Police say a nurse who disappeared in South London over a month ago could still be travelling by train and appearing confused. Detectives have issued an appeal on Twitter saying Awami Davies may also be seeking to engage with women travelling alone. Ms Davies was last seen walking along London Road in Croydon on the 7th of July. A 44-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the stabbing of Thomas O'Halloran in West London. The 87-year-old grandfather was attacked whilst riding his mobility scooter in Greenford on Tuesday. Police say the arrest was made as a result of CCTV images released yesterday. And in breaking news just in, the former chief financial officer at the Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg, has pleaded guilty to conspiring with the company in a 15-year tax fraud. The 75-year-old may now be required to testify against the Trump Organization at a criminal trial in October. However, he's not expected to cooperate with a larger probe into Donald Trump himself. The former president has not been charged or accused of any wrongdoing. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back now to Colin Brazier.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
This is proving to be a really popular feature. Our visit today to the Speaker's Corner. It's that part of our show where I let our studio guests get their views off their chest about a topic they really care about. Today it's the turn of the health editor at the Sunday Express, Lucy Johnson. For the next 2 minutes or so, Lucy, the show is yours.
So I vividly remember the disappointment of opening the envelope with my A-level results to find I'd slipped a grade. The scramble of phoning around universities and the relief when I secured a place at Birmingham University through clearing. At least when I was doing my A-levels, there appeared to be a level playing field. Those days, we rightly put education on the highest pedestal. This year, competition for university places is tough. There's grade inflation crackdown, universities are cutting places after over-recruiting, and British students are being rejected in favour of high-playing overseas students to cover inflation costs. This is the latest blow to a generation whose lives have been upended by COVID measures. No one who is not a teenager today can understand the added stress their generation has suffered. These children had to sit their exams, which could determine the rest of their education, even their lives, having spent the best part of their previous year shut at home, remote learning. Britain's school closures lasted longer than any other European country, bar Italy. Every one of them should be proud today, whatever their result. For those in poverty with limited or no access to laptops or Wi-Fi, whose parents were out at work all day, it would have been tempting to just give up and say, no one values education, why should I? And perhaps that's why over 100,000 ghost children dropped off the school register since school closures. No one knows where they are. Children are resilient, but resilience only comes from learning, from stepping outside a comfort zone and from peers. These children were denied this. We now have an epidemic of anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders, suicidal thoughts and depression among teenagers. The number of young people with a probable mental disorder, according to the NHS, is up from 1 in 9 before the pandemic to 1 in 6 now. Record numbers are on antidepressants and Valium as mental health services collapse. Our children are in a mental health emergency. In any disaster, we have always put children first. During World War I, we sent them to safer places in the countryside. We put women and children in lifeboats first. Why did we forget this during the pandemic? We can't now repair the damage that we've done, but the government must ensure the rights of children come first. Rather than a star for excellence on their A-level grade, we must ensure that doesn't become an asterisk to mark the pandemic year.
Well, that was terrific and will be available online very soon. Lucy, a couple of points really there to get into. I'm amazed about our lockdown extending in schools longer than any other country, bar Italy. That's an absolute shocker. Some of the stuff about mental health we know, but it's worth being reminded of. But more than anything else, I mean, in a sense, this generation, I'm not going to say they're irrecoverable, but the damage is done. Surely what we have to, the first priority is to make sure that if we are, and we're going to be talking about this in just a second, if we confront another winter, we are confronted with a new variant, we don't do what we've just done to our kids all over again.
Absolutely right. And we knew from spring 2020 that children were not super spreaders, that they were not at serious risk, healthy children were not at serious risk from COVID. And we knew that it wasn't necessary in that sense to close schools. In fact, a paper came out today about Sweden, which didn't close its schools, and there was no lost learning there. We have a whole year of lost learning here. So Robert Halfon, the chair of the Education Select Committee, has tried to introduce a triple bill to make schools like an essential service so that we are not allowed to ever lock down, to close them again. But there's not been much appetite for approving that in the government. So I'm not sure why, because it's clear now that it was the wrong thing to do. And I think most people agree that it was the wrong thing to do. So we need to protect children. And at the same time, we hear that there's calls for a 3-day week in schools because of inflationary costs. So it seems, you know, that we really are not learning from those mistakes.
OK, well, we'll get to touch on some of those topics in just a second, because it's time for our debate this hour. And it revolves around this. Remember Tony Blair? The Tony Blair Institute, his eponymous institute, has said the UK government must be prepared to bring back mandatory face masks on public transport. Well, obviously not today because there's none running because of strike action, from this coming autumn. The former Prime Minister's think tank is also advocating the return of a legal obligation to wear masks for indoor events in case of a new COVID variant. So we're asking, is Tony Blair right on this one? Should mandatory masks on public transport return? Lucy Johnson's here to argue one side of this conversation. Dr. Bharat Pankania is a senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School as well, who joins us to take, I think, a different view on this one. Dr. Pankania, thanks for your time as ever. As early as the autumn, mandatory public transport, for why?
Well, what we should really be saying is not autumn, but what we should be looking at is the case numbers and what the situation is. In other words, do we have a abnormal variant, highly infectious, highly disease-causing, lots of hospital admissions and deaths, or what the situation is, and then you act preemptively. So it isn't a case of in the autumn; it's a case of whenever that situation calls for. Now, it cannot just be one thing will sort the problem out. It has to be a multi-layered approach. We've been through this pandemic 2 years. It is not rocket science to able to say to you all, to say to everyone, is this. It's a multifaceted approach, which is immunization, ventilation, masks, stay out of circulation if you are unwell, early intervention if you are infected with antivirals. So when you put all those measures in place, they work. Masks on their own, whilst you ignore ventilation, whilst you ignore the fact that you've got infectious persons amongst you, it doesn't work very well.
OK. Lucy Johnson.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to take issue with that, rather. The masks on their own, on an individual basis, there is some laboratory studies that suggest they may reduce your risk of infection. But across the board, across the world, we've seen that mask mandates seem to have absolutely no effect. And the best quality studies, not the laboratory studies where a mask is put on someone's face and there's a airflow that, predicts where the air is going onto another mannequin or whatever it is. The best quality studies are randomised control studies, and those from Denmark, from Bangladesh, show that there's very little signal, if any, about the use of community-based mask wearing. And that could be for lots of reasons. People don't wear them properly, pieces of cloth around the face which are put on and off and put them in your pocket. They can actually cause infections. Not only that, but there are also harms to wearing masks in society. What kind of society do we want to live in if we, want to dehumanise people?
Sorry, Dr. Pankania, were you saying I misheard? Did you say like what? What harms?
Yeah, so, I think we need to engage seriously. I'm not against some of the things that Lucy has said, which is this: wear your mask, wear it properly, wear a good quality mask. But to then shout, wave and say, well, the masks are causing harm, that's a little bit stretching it a little bit too far.
Well, no, hang on. OK, that's your assertion. Let's just put that to the test, or at least to Lucy's judgment. I mean, I don't think, Lucy, you're suggesting clinical harms, are you?
There's some evidence. There are some studies showing that people are at increased risk of infection because they get moist, they pick up other pathogens. But psychologically, we have neurodiverse communities, we have deaf people, we have a society which we have lived perfectly well with respiratory diseases for ad infinitum without masks, without good evidence that they work and with evidence that they are causing problems with people, people who can't hear each other, children who are trying to learn to read and speak. We actually don't really look at the harms, and that's one of the things we haven't really done. We just bring in measures as a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, this looks like it will work, let's assume it will work. The bottom line is mask mandates, as opposed to individual mask wearing experiments, have not worked. And that's the bottom line. You can say all you like, people must wear them properly and they must wear surgical masks, but they don't, and they haven't. And, you know, we have teenagers, we have
Yes,
people...
and they haven't, and they haven't, because we have had a government that has been reluctant from the start of this pandemic to do it properly. They were late in implementing control measures. They were reluctant to implement proper control measures, and they continue to do so. Now, if you look at the WHO and other august bodies similarly, and you look at the Far East examples, mask wearing has been successful and useful. Give you another example: masks worn properly in a clinical setting, in a London hospital nonetheless, right, showed that the healthcare workers did not get infected, and very few infections occurred amongst healthcare workers when they wore their masks, when they wore the masks properly. The problem is, in the United Kingdom, we have a polarized place now where we have, I'm going to wear my mask, I'm going to wear it properly, and then we have people who say, I'm not going to wear it, and I'm going to do all I can not to wear it in a public place, even when they may be infected and infectious to others. We have a problem. And that problem, the biggest elephant in the room is we had a reluctant government wanting to do the right thing at the right time.
Well, I mean, Lucy Johnson's just made the point that they weren't reluctant to keep our schools closed down longer than any other country, bar Italy. That's a separate...
Well, on the subject of schools, because I was involved with a lot of school outbreaks.
It's Lucy's turn now, Doctor.
Well, you can't blame the government for people not wearing proper masks at the right time, but even if they did, there's still no randomised controls, large-scale study that shows that that would stop the spread or even slow the spread of a virus, of a respiratory virus.
If you scale up the selected studies you've quoted.
I can't, sorry, I missed that.
I would refer you to several WHO studies, World Health Organization studies, which have clearly indicated that masks worn properly do reduce transmission of infections.
In healthcare settings, maybe, but randomised control studies in the community show there is no difference. And if you look across the countries, we've had mask mandates, no mask mandates, mask on, mask off. There's no big change. So if there's such a weak signal, and the fact that we're arguing about it today, it suggests that we need to start looking at the harms and looking at the evidence but proper evidence for those masks. If we're having a debate about it, then, you know, why bring something in? It's not clear-cut, and the mask mandates have been shown to have done nothing. Can I just
take us back to where we started, Dr. Mancali, and that's in relation to what the Tony Blair Institute is saying. And I totally take what you say about this being prudential. The Institute's not saying there must be mandatory masks come the autumn or the winter. They're saying if it becomes a clinical necessity in the views of some clinicians, then it's an option. But, you know, what would it take? At what point does that get triggered? How virulent, how lethal a variant would it have to be for all the downsides, which I think Lucy takes the view you don't fully take full account of? That's her view. You will obviously disagree. What would it take? How bad a variant needs to be coming down the tracks at us for us to be forced to wear these wretched things all over again?
Well, what you would start to look at is two things. One, the rising number of cases, and the other one is case fatality rates. What I mean by case fatality rates is people who become infected and then a small percentage go on to die. Now, remember, if a lot of people get infected, then even a small percentage, you know, if you're talking about 1 or 2%, that is a lot of people who could have been saved from premature deaths. So we need to look at, you know, what the trend is, and if the case fatality rates for whatever variant is in circulation is high, then you need to take all possible measures possible, right? If, on the other hand, we have a variant that is causing mild illness and people are making recoveries and not dying, fair enough, you say. Well, let's carry on with business as normal.
That's obviously what we hope for. We're out of time. Dr. Bankani and Lucy Johnson,
Indeed.
Thanks both very much indeed. Emails on this, unsurprisingly, it continues to be a topic that motivates you. David says, I doubt that many people will agree with Tony Blair on much. He has had his day in power. Masks of the type that most people wear are useless. That's a view. Sue says, Tony Blair, who created most of the problems the NHS are experiencing today, why would anyone listen to him? Alan says, because he runs an institute, Tony Blair thinks he has the power to influence government policy. He should keep his nose out. Sarah says, since when was Tony Blair a doctor? Should we really listen to him? And Tom says, I never understand why people get angry about masks. What harm does a bit of cotton on your face, just wear one. Keep them coming in. 5 to 5 then, as we discuss 5 things you need to know about, maybe need to know about before 5 o'clock. At 5, Liz Truss has pledged to defend people's rights to pay for goods in cash amid a sharp increase in businesses only accepting card payments. The Tory leadership hopeful says there has to be an alternative to modern methods of payment. Goodness me, she's right. At 4, the African nation of Gambia has told UK grandmothers to look for toy boys somewhere else. The tourism board says it's become a hub for older British women seeking younger partners. At 3, Japan's urged its young people to drink more booze in an effort to boost the country's economy. The country's sober population is said to be hurting Japan's tax revenue base from alcohol as well as the wider economy, with the government starting a campaign to get 20 to 39-year-olds drinking. Wouldn't need it here, or maybe you would. At 2, a homeowner said they were forced to take action against a neighbour who built a fence going directly through part of their garden. A TikTok user hired handymen to dismantle the fence plank by plank, stacking the lumber up neatly for their neighbour. It's reported they no longer talk over the fence. And at 1, bees are stressed out about climate change, so says a new study. Scientists have found that in hotter and wetter years, the pollinators have displayed greater lopsidedness. No, I have no idea what that means either. Drought conditions have also caused problems for bees that don't live in hives, as they're unable to burrow into the ground. That's 5 to 5 for you. Lucy Johnson is alongside me here now. Anything caught your ear there you're welcome to talk about? Or masks, which I didn't get the feeling you'd finished talking about.
I hadn't quite, but I know we have to move on, yes. I was thinking there are 300 respiratory viruses, so if we do it for COVID, why are we not doing it for everything else? It never ends, does it? When does it end?
Well, I agree. Come on, let's forget the 5 to 5. Let's just talk about the masks again, because he's very reasonable, Dr. Pankani, for the most part, but there is, it seems to me, in parts of our clinical community, a reluctance to, no pun intended, face up to some of the unintended consequences of wearing masks, the social impact on how we relate to each other as human beings.
Absolutely, and I think there are studies, I can't remember the figures, but babies' learning and development, the learning words, has been stalled and stifled by the mask wearing. Children in schools...
This was, I think, just ignored. Stalking increased during lockdown because blokes were able to put a mask on and not be recognised by CCTV cameras.
Yeah.
There's so much that's just not factored in.
And absolutely, and I think that's the problem with all of the non-pharmaceutical interventions that we have. When we do a drug trial, we do proper randomised controlled studies and look at the harms, the side effects against the benefits. When we throw out these measures that we think will stop or slow the spread of a virus, we never do that. In fact, we've had plenty of time. We've had 2 years to have done those studies, but we didn't. And so we rely on poor quality studies, there are hundreds and thousands of them, to inform policy.
We're going to leave it there.
And that's wrong. Mm-hmm.
Lucy Johnson, thanks very much indeed. Much more news coming up. Do stay with us.
There's just 2 weeks left of voting in the battle to become Britain's next Prime Minister. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have been dashing around the country, and tomorrow night they make their pitches to Conservative voters in the heart of Labour-run Manchester. But do either of them have what it takes to defend and maintain Boris Johnson's mighty majority? GB News is proud to be hosting the Conservative Hustings in Manchester, live and exclusive from 7 p.m. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there. Coming up live at 5, the first day of a weekend of chaos on Britain's railways today, I'm afraid. Up to 45,000 workers walking off the job again, the 6th strike since June. How much patience does the British travelling public have left? Let us know. Also, the tourism board in Gambia has called on British tourists to stop travelling there for sex. The West African country has supposedly become a magnet for British and other women who are looking for flings with younger men. I'll speak to the journalist Caroline Farrow, who says it's about time sex tourism was called out. As the Labour Party loses around 91,000 members within a year, I'll ask, is this a vote of no confidence in Keir Starmer or a cri de coeur from fans of Jeremy Corbyn? With me for the next hour, the Health and Social Affairs editor at the Sunday Express, Lucy Johnston. But first, the latest news headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Colin. 1 minute past 5, here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The number of top A-level grades awarded to students in England, Wales and Northern Ireland has fallen since last year. However, they do remain higher than pre-pandemic levels, which is the last time that students physically sat exams. Meanwhile, UCAS says the number of students accepted at universities and colleges has also dropped. Education Secretary James Cleverly says support is available for those students who need it.
We wanted to get the grades back towards the kind of levels that we saw pre-pandemic. We've taken a big step in that right direction. 2/3 of students getting their first or reserve place at university, and that is great. And for those students who haven't quite got the grades that they were hoping for, and that happens every year, there's a whole range of support both at school, university and at clearing to help them get onto a great course for them.
Union bosses are warning that strike action will continue until a settlement is reached. More than 40,000 rail workers have walked out today and will again on Saturday in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. Public transport in London will also be affected by industrial action tomorrow. RMT Secretary-General Mick Lynch says the situation is being made worse due to threats from the Department of Transport.
Well, he's threatened at the weekend to make all our people redundant, issuing Section 188 forms, getting rid of all the guards on the trains. They want to close all the booking offices in the country so that people can't buy their tickets and get assistance. So there's all sorts of problems and the rhetoric is going up. What I think Grant Shapps needs to do is calm down and allow the railway executives, the managers of these companies, to reach a deal with us in collective negotiations, which I think we could do.
Well, the Department for Transport has responded, saying we urge union bosses to do the right thing by their members and let them have their say on Network Rail's very fair deal, which we will deliver the reforms our rail system urgently needs. A 44-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the stabbing of Thomas O'Halloran in West London. The 87-year-old grandfather was attacked whilst riding his mobility scooter in Greenford on Tuesday. Police have been seen searching an address in relation to their investigation. Greater Manchester Police is appealing for help in finding a man suspected of sexually assaulting a 6-year-old girl. Detectives have issued 2 images of a man they wish to speak to. Police say the girl was taken into a wooded area in Droylsden at around 4 p.m. yesterday and then to a van where she was attacked. She was reunited with her family shortly after and is receiving specialist support. Detective Superintendent Richard Hunt says the force is doing everything it can to track the perpetrator down.
This incident started on a grassed area between Warren Avenue and Hawthorne Road in Droylsden at around 4 p.m. and that is actually this location here. Extensive inquiries are ongoing with significant resources, and I would like to reassure the community, and as a precautionary measure we have extra police officers and PCSOs out and about. At this time it does appear to be an isolated incident.
The former chief financial officer at the Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg, has pleaded guilty to conspiring with the company in a 15-year tax fraud. The 75-year-old may now be required to testify against the Trump Organization at a criminal trial in October. However, he's not expected to cooperate with a larger probe into Donald Trump himself. The former president has not been charged or accused of wrongdoing. British Transport Police say a nurse who disappeared in South London over a month ago could still be travelling by train and appearing confused. Detectives have issued an appeal on Twitter saying Awami Davies may also be seeking to engage with women who are travelling alone. Ms Davies was last seen walking along London Road in Croydon on the 7th of July. The mother of Archie Battersby is campaigning for a new law named after her son. Holly Dance is calling for a change to the system regarding end-of-life cases. Archie's family made multiple court appeals to continue his treatment, but he died on the 6th of August after being taken off of life support. Speaking to GB News for the first time since her son's death, Holly said cases like Archie's are taking their toll on families.
There's been another baby, his life support was withdrawn 2 days after Archie. There's another case that was in court yesterday. It's the stress placed on us by the system. It's something that's got to change. We've written to the Health Secretary, so moving forward to see what we can change. I think the whole thing that you're rushed into court, that's got to change.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Back now to Colin Brazier.
Hi there, thanks for your company. 7 minutes past 5. We will get into what's been happening on Britain's railways today. The 6th strike, industrial action since June, the impact it's having on you. You've been sharing your stories. We'll get around to telling you some of them and sharing some more of them a little later on. But the story, unquestionably, which has really got your goat today, is the Tony Blair think tank. It's in his name. I'm sure Tony Blair hasn't personally signed off this particular idea. Don't think so. But the idea is that mandatory face masks against COVID, the next variant, should be reintroduced as early as this autumn. Lucy Johnson is my guest today, who's writing a book on this, well, I was going to say on this very subject, but certainly on the impact of lockdown and all the downsides which are under-recognised, including those of wearing a mask.
Absolutely. And in fact, I was talking to someone who studies airflow and sort of mechanical engineering. He said that you have to look at a mask like this. If you scale it up and scale it down, it's the equivalent to marbles thrown at scaffolding. So the particles of your breath are being thrown at scaffolding, which is like the mask itself, the framework of the mask. Maybe one or two of those particles might hit a bit of the mask, but generally it's not stopping anything. There is no evidence that mask mandates have any effect on slowing the spread of a virus. There is plenty of evidence about the psychological harms to people. And if you look at it, we have to ask, what kind of society do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a society where we're having to block and stop every virus? There are hundreds of them, and hundreds we don't even know about.
Are we being softened up a little bit with this?
Well, potentially. I mean, I do worry because it's an easy thing politically. If you can do something, it doesn't mean you should do it, but politicians have to do it, and then they just sort of follow suit with each other, don't they? And they go in lockstep. So I think that, you know, it's a creep. And so once you introduce masks, then you introduce more things. And again, we go back into the measures that, in fact, have no really good evidence for. We don't know. When you look across the world, you can see that countries locked down hard, countries didn't lock down or did voluntary measures. Not many countries didn't lock down, but there is no real difference. You can't see a very strong evidence that lockdowns actually had a good effect. But we jolly know from looking at the cost of living crisis today that they do have a really harmful effect on us.
I think many people will agree with you when you say there's a creep there when the words Tony Blair come up. Lucy, thanks very much indeed. Travel chaos once again this rush hour as 45,000 rail workers walk out in a dispute over pay and working conditions, shutting down 80% of the network. The Department for Transport said union leaders were opting to inflict misery and disrupt the day-to-day lives of millions instead of working with industry to agree a deal. That's in quotes. The strike action comes ahead of a rail fare increases, which would add £433 onto the cost of the average season ticket. The former Transport Minister, Norman Baker, joins us now. Norman, welcome to you. Can we just start with the strike? I mean, I was looking at my script earlier. It says 45,000 workers didn't work today. We never quite know how many have obeyed the picket lines, how many have tried to work. Do you get the impression that this strike action is being observed as faithfully as it was right at the beginning?
Yes, I think that however people voted, they are quite prepared to go along with the mandate of the majority of the union that they happen to be in. So I don't think there's very much prospect of strike breaking occurring. I mean, just the link between the last item you ran, Colin, and this one is pertinent, because the railways are in a problem because they have got only 80% or thereabouts of pre-COVID levels. And one of the reasons that we haven't got 100% return, one reason, there's a number of reasons, but one reason is because the government told people at the beginning that train and bus travel was unsafe. Coronavirus takes the train. So the idea that we could have mask mandates for trains without any reference to supermarkets or anything else is just bonkers and presents public transport as unsafe when it's actually totally safe to go on public transport. And indeed, by the way, I just agree with Lucy's point about mask mandates generally, but to single out public transport at this point by Tony Blair is deeply unhelpful.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. I hadn't made that connection, but of course you're absolutely right, and it just further undermines the case if there were to be any variant of lockdown in the future for public transport. And why is it being singled out? Just in terms of the strike action, I mentioned that's it, half a dozen we've had elements of industrial action since June. There doesn't seem to be, it's so hard to measure these things, there has been some polling, the degree of public weariness. Obviously, people are exasperated, they get annoyed, but you don't get the impression they're absolutely demanding the union stop it, or do you?
No, there isn't the same degree of weariness. It's partly because the strikes are 1 day a week or 2 days a week, and therefore people are working around them. It is partly because the nature of transport usage has changed. You know, we're no longer in the days, 20, 30 years ago when commuters turned up 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and when a strike occurred, they couldn't do anything. I mean, now people can work from home. And leisure travel is now the growth area in rail rather than commuter traffic. So rail travel is much more optional than it used to be. So the danger is not, I think, the public will get wearied of the strikes, so some will get wearied. But the danger really is that the economics of the railway are going to be severely impacted. And that makes the opportunity to reach a sensible conclusion more difficult, because a sensible conclusion has to be that some of the outdated working practices that exist on the railway have to be jettisoned. And in return for that, the money released from those changes being introduced is given to the rail workers who deserve a decent pay rise. But it has to be one that's affordable. And that's the deal. But I have to say that there's no great win on either side here, because the government is being slightly intransigent behind the scenes. The rail unions are not giving as much ground as they should do on conditions. And some of the rail companies actually are to blame, because many of them have been very happy to rely on overtime from drivers rather than employing new drivers, which require them to train them at some cost. So, frankly, nobody comes out of this, or has come out of this so far, with very much credit.
Norman, just the way you tell it, it sounds like this could carry on almost indefinitely, because neither side stands to lose that much.
Well, I think there's no prospect of the government giving further ground, and the government is pulling the strings behind the scenes. Let's be quite clear about that. There's no prospect of the government giving further ground until we end up with a new cabinet, because for Grant Shapps to give ground now would undermine his position within the Conservative Party, I suspect. And the unions have got apparently some public support and certainly support from their own members, so they don't look like giving ground either. So this will drag on, I'm afraid, this particular dispute. And the danger is that when it's settled, there'll be fewer people using the railway and less income for the railway, and that's going to affect the future prospects of the railway.
That's the former Transport Minister, Norman Baker. Norman, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. Lucy Johnson is alongside me today. What a cracking example of the unforeseen consequences of lockdown and how we use mask mandates. As Norman's a great fan of the railways, he sees the damage masks have done on something he cherishes.
Absolutely. But I think, he's saying why pick out rails. I'm saying why pick out COVID? We have the same infection to fatality rate for COVID as we do for seasonal influenza. If we do it for COVID, we would do it for everything else. I don't understand the logic.
Just say that to me again, just so I've got that absolutely clear.
So now, following the vaccine rollout and following the rise of different Omicron, which is a much milder
variant,
it was different when the virus first hit us. The infection to fatality rate for coronavirus is similar to seasonal influenza, and we are in no more threat from COVID as we are for seasonal flu.
Wow. Okay. So just to be clear, though, however, if another variant comes down, the track, and it's a lot more serious than seasonal flu, then maybe we need to think.
We have variants of flu. We have variants of all sorts of respiratory viruses. We have, as I said, about 300 known respiratory viruses. The ones that they seem to track and monitor, actually, interestingly, are the ones that have vaccines. RSV and some other ones, and that's interesting, in terms of looking at what money being made. So if you keep looking for something, you'll keep finding it, and if you keep looking for variants and then suggesting that they may be more deadly and then finding they're not more deadly, it's like stars in the sky territory. It never ends.
Yeah, Lucy, for now, thanks very much indeed. Can we have our cake and eat it? Apparently not, at least not when it comes to tax cuts. The highly regarded Institute for Fiscal Studies says neither Liz Truss nor Rishi Sunak are being realistic about their plans to cut tax. Why? Because, says the IFS, tax cuts can only work if they happen alongside spending cuts. Liz Truss has pledged to scrap April's national insurance rise to help households cancel a planned rise in corporation tax. There's other measures she suggested as well. Rishi Sunak, on the other hand, has vowed to cut, is it 3p? Yes, 3p, that's right, off income tax, but not until the end of the decade. Both candidates say their plans are affordable, but the Institute for Fiscal Studies has argued large permanent tax cuts could put pressure on the public coffers. Wasn't it 4p in the pound? Rishi Sunak was suggesting.
I thought it was 3, but I might be wrong. Yeah,
I'm wrong. Here's somebody who knows, the Deputy Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, Carl Emerson. Carl Emerson, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. It's easy to cut taxes, harder to cut the size of the state and the public sector.
Indeed, and there's good reasons to want tax cuts. It gives you more money in your pocket after you've earned some money. It can also lead to a bit more growth and lots of nice things, but that's not the same as saying that they will pay for themselves. We're not in that lucky position where we can just point to taxes in the UK and say, well, if we cut that, we'll get more revenue or get the same revenue. That's really not the case. The extra growth you get from a tax cut might take the edge off some of the revenue you're foregoing. But ultimately, if you want taxes to be lower as a share of our national income, you're going to have to identify some spending cuts. And I think that's the problem with the plans that we're hearing about. It's not a problem per se with the goal of cutting taxes. It's a problem that we're hearing lots of details about the nice bits, lower income tax rates or lower national insurance rates or lower corporation tax rates. What we're not hearing is anything like the same kind of detail on what things are the public sector doing that perhaps are nice to have, but we'd rather have the tax cuts.
Give us some suggestions, Carl, if you could. I mean, one thing that struck me, given that I know if we talk about it, we get lots of emails. Now, that may not be a wholly reliable metric on which to base government policy, but for instance, if we talk about the foreign aid budget, I mean, I know it's been, in quotes, temporarily brought down from 0.7 to, I think, 0.5% of GDP, but it's still 12 billion quid a year. Neither of the candidates, maybe because they don't want to be seen as, leaders of the nasty party, have brought that into play. But you could cut it in half. You could scrap most of it.
Absolutely, you could decide to cut the aid budget. You can take any budget and choose to cut it. It's about making choices, though. What you can't choose to do is say, we're going to cut lots of taxes and we're just going to spend the same or more. And I think that's what they're both guilty of, albeit to slightly different extents. So if you listen to them talk about defence spending, that's an area where governments over the last 20, 30, 40 years have been cutting spending in order to pay for increases on things like the NHS without having to increase taxes. Well, actually, that's an area where they both want to increase spending going forwards, not cut it. So they've talked about one area of spending where they want to push spending up, but they're not talking about international aid, as you suggest, or indeed the social security budget, the pensioner budget, and the NHS budget, the schools budget, or any other budgets where you could look for cuts.
They can always just borrow more.
Certainly you can borrow more in the short run, and I think that there's going to be a lot of borrowing in the short run because of the weakness to the economy from the current cost of living crisis, plus the undoubted need to help lots of households over the next couple of years. What you can't do is keep borrowing money over year on year on year over the longer term. So there's a good case for more borrowing over the next through this winter and into the next year. There's not a good case for having lots more borrowing on a permanent basis.
Carl Emerson from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Really appreciate your time and your expertise. Thanks very much indeed. Lucy Johnson is alongside me today. On that moral point, I mean, I didn't want to get into the politics necessarily with Carl Emerson. He comes at this as an economist. But I mean, I thought Rishi Sunak had said, borrowing is immoral. Putting future generations on the hook for our profligacies today is morally wrong.
Well, is that not rather rich coming from someone who spent 37 billion on a test and trace scheme that made no difference, and he was told it would make no difference? What seems incredible is that they can spend huge amounts of money on theatre, which in effect that was epic spending was done. £500 billion was spent on these measures without any need to justify how that will bring back money into the economy. So, this is one of the reasons why we're in such debt. And I think there needs to be some kind of reckoning and some kind of accountability.
Well, I mean, what does that look like? I mean, I know we've talked about this here in the commercial break, and I'm of the view that you need to introduce some sort of moral hazard for modelers, for instance, who get it really, really wrong and whose judgments lead to lots of other deaths, for instance, from cancer or whatever it is. But we don't really want to introduce a system of penalties that will inhibit thinking, because that's what it would do.
I think the point was that we had a group of kind of closed-minded, effectively biomedical people, doctors, deciding on things, and there was a panicked government that was not really looking at the information they had about managing a pandemic. We did have plans. It was lost in the organisational memory. But I think we need to not look at, did we do this, should we have locked down earlier and harder, should we have done it more? We need to look at it in the round and say, we've lost a huge amount of money, which has partly led to this huge debt and the huge problems that we're in now. And we must make sure that we look at the whole thing and look at it properly. And we've lost £47 billion in COVID fraud. Where's that gone? And that's not being chased up. That could be helpful now.
No, wow, when you put it like that. We're talking about Tony Blair's plans for masks to be mandatory on public transport come the autumn. Sue says, no, ignore Tony Blair. We should definitely not bring back masks anywhere. We've had enough. It's just virtue signalling. Anne says, I won't wear another mask. I can't breathe with one on. David says, I've worked all through the last 2 years without wearing a mask, without being jabbed, and I haven't had COVID. What's the point? Phyllis says, why would anyone listen to Tony Blair? He's now irrelevant. And Lauren says, if you want to wear one, on you go, but there's no problem. There is no problem, but it should be a choice to protect yourself. Lucy, that's the canard, isn't it? It wasn't a choice. People didn't have a choice because they were told that what they did would affect other people.
And that was the clever trick. And that was the way we were psychologically manipulated. That was the virtue signalling. There was no good evidence for that either. And what really gets me is that people were allowed to take their masks off, go back into pubs, go back into Primark, go back into the shops, and children were forced to wear them, and politicians telling them that they had to wear them.
Can I just briefly, because there will be, people saying, no, you're forgetting. Oh, Captain Hindsight's there. You're both forgetting that there was that moment of panic when we didn't really know what we were dealing with. And, track and trace, we can look back and say it was a colossal waste of money now, but at the time...
I disagree. There were plenty of senior epidemiologists, plenty of scientists saying that you cannot track and trace, you cannot Operation Moonshot. I think they wanted to test everyone every day. There are too many problems with the test. There are too many people that couldn't afford to isolate. It was just a massive experiment. It had no good evidence for it, and people were saying it at the time. There were tried and tested measures of dealing with a pandemic, which Sweden actually followed, which was identify vulnerable people, educate, give guidance and support, not do nothing, but treat people like grown-ups.
Well, that certainly wasn't done at times, that's for sure. Lucy, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, odd one this, the tourism board in Gambia, the Gambia, has called on British tourists to stop travelling there for sex. The West African country has supposedly become a magnet for British women who are looking for flings with younger men. I'll speak to the journalist Caroline Farrow, who says it's about time sex tourism to the Gambia was called out. Back in a moment.
Join my show Farrow, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrow.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Couple of minutes shy of 5:30. Thanks for your company. Plenty of you getting in touch with your thoughts about Lucy Johnston's Speaker's Corner today. It'll be available, if it isn't already, online on our Twitter feed. It was about how young people have been really let down by the education system today. A-level results day in England and Wales, and Northern Ireland, I think. My 18-year-old got hers. Brian says schools were kept shut longer in the UK because of the teaching unions. They are to blame, not the government, a bit like the trains too. Chris says, Lucy's right, young people have been wholly mistreated over the last 2 to 3 years. It's unforgivable what government policy has done to these kids. There's no help to even begin to make up for the damage to their education, something we will all pay for in the long run. And Millie says the education system is ultimately the government's responsibility. So it's another failure by the government. They just keep adding up. Keep them coming in. Strange story this. The tourism board in Gambia has a stark warning for British tourists. The West African country says British women should stop coming to the country looking for flings with younger men. That's a euphemism. The director of the tourism board there has suggested he wants to send what he calls promiscuous pensioners packing, as the country wants to attract what were described as quality tourists who come to enjoy the culture instead of sex. Well, sex tourism took hold there after the launch of budget package tours in the 1990s, with reports of young Gambian beach boys often seen assisting older female tourists, some old enough to be their grandmothers. Journalist, writer and commentator Caroline Farrow joins me now. Hi to you, Caroline. It's very rare that I read an introduction to a story which feels like no other story I've ever introduced before on the telly. This is one of those stories. And on one level, that's good because you want to be made to think about the news in new ways. A first reaction to this is that, of course, men have been travelling abroad for tourism for decades, if not longer. What do we make of this? What do we make of what the Gambians are saying about this?
Well, in many ways, I feel a little bit uncomfortable because, it's up to Gambia what laws they want to set. And obviously, they want to clean up their tourist industry. I think I read somewhere that sex tourism accounts for 20% of their GDP. And it's very easy for us to kind of titter and giggle at the idea of older women going to have affairs with younger Gambian men. It's not seen as quite so taboo or exploitative, but it is, because if you're having to basically induce somebody to have sex with you because they wouldn't do so otherwise, it is a form of exploitation. And older women having sex with younger men is only one side, is only one element to sex industry or sex tourist industry. So we also are seeing reports in Gambia of younger and younger children, including girls as young as 8, becoming recruited into this trade. And when you have a sex trade, it doesn't help the country to lift itself out of poverty. It just sort of increases, the poverty trap, and it says something to a society if the only way that people can better themselves is by selling themselves for sex. So I think Gambia has an awful lot to offer. It's got chimpanzee reserves. It's got wildlife, apparently incredible species of birds. Although I'm widely travelled, it's not a country I've been to. And I think good for them, actually. I mean, Africa is a socially conservative continent. So, it is... In an age where we're also sensitive about colonialism, then we shouldn't be going over there and attempting to impose our liberal, progressive sexual values onto what is a very socially conservative country.
I feel like I'm tiptoeing through a moral minefield here, Caroline. Do let me know if anything goes bang. How does it differ? I'm sorry, again, trying to think it through. How does what you've described differ, say, for instance, from groups, very large groups, of young male and female Brits going to a part of the world which is socially conservative and being promiscuous? I mean, they are taking with them a set of moral code which is, doesn't sit comfortably with that of the country which they're visiting. How does that differ from what's happening in the Gambia?
Well, of course, when groups of young men and women, sexually promiscuous young men and young women, go to these conservative countries, they often do find themselves a cropper. We're always reading about stories, particularly in the Middle East. And it's a reminder to everybody that when you visit another country, it's a privilege, and you ought to respect the traditions and culture of the country that you're visiting. But the difference is here, basically, women and men, anybody going abroad to try and coerce somebody into having sex, to try and pay them for sex, that's exploitative and shouldn't happen. I think it's a different kind of morality. And, the same applies in an age of female equality. Let's hold women and men accountable to the same standards. So just as it's not okay for men to go over to Thailand, I know that's a very common country, to procure younger children for sex, just as it's not okay pay for men to go to wherever to procure young women for sex and to pay them. The same standard applies to women. It's not acceptable to pay somebody to exploit them for use of their body. And frankly, if somebody is not wanting to have sex with you without the inducement of money, then you are violating their boundaries and you're infringing their human dignity. I mean, sex is not shouldn't be a sort of financially transactional activity. It should be a mutually consensual activity. And by the time you get to the point of having to pay someone to give you use of their body, then something has gone morally wrong. And as I said, it's also the senior side, the children. Wherever there's a sex industry, it's children and women who are affected too.
Caroline, got to leave it there, but appreciate your time. Caroline Farrow. Coming up, as the Labour Party loses some 91,000 members within a year, we'll ask, is this a vote of no confidence in Keir Starmer or a cri de coeur from fans of Jeremy Corbyn? Latest news headlines from Ray first.
Thanks, Colin. Coming up to 5:35, I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The number of top A-level grades awarded to students in England, Wales and Northern Ireland has fallen since last year. They do, however, remain higher than pre-pandemic levels, the last time students physically sat exams. Meanwhile, UCAS says the number of students accepted at universities and colleges has also dropped. The Queen's granddaughter, Lady Louise Windsor, is among those who've received their results. Buckingham Palace says she'll attend St Andrews University. The 18-year-old daughter of the Earl and Countess of Wessex will start her course in English in September. She'll be following in the footsteps of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, who met at the university in Fife. The Secretary-General of the RMT Union says there'll be waves of public sector workers joining in with strike action amid rising inflation and falling wages. Rail, tube and bus passengers face ongoing travel disruption amid 3 days of industrial action. 80% of train services are affected today as more than 40,000 workers walked out in a dispute over pay and conditions. Police are searching a house in connection with the stabbing of an 87-year-old man in West London. Thomas O'Halloran was attacked whilst riding his mobility scooter in Greenford on Tuesday. Detectives say a 44-year-old man has been detained in relation to the killing. He was arrested at an address in Southall in the early hours of this morning. The former chief financial officer at the Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg, has pleaded guilty to conspiring with the company in a 15-year tax fraud. The 75-year-old may now be required to testify against the Trump Organization at a criminal trial in October. However, he's not expected to cooperate with a larger probe into Donald Trump himself. The former president has not been charged or accused of wrongdoing in this case. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back now to Colin Brazier.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
But first, a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.198 and 1.184 euros. The price of gold currently standing at £1,468 and 78 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, it's time for our debate this hour. More than 90,000 people have left the Labour Party within the last year, as critics suggest the departure of Jeremy Corbyn may have sparked that exodus, if that's what it is, of members. Sir Keir Starmer says membership always declines between elections. How true is that? Labour still has more than twice as many members as the Conservative Party, and of course they're not going to vote in the leadership election for our next Prime Minister right now. We're asking, with the fall in membership, have people lost faith? How many people have lost faith in the Labour Party? We're joined by the political commentator Benedict Spence and the former Labour MP and journalist Dennis McShane. Welcome to you both. Benedict, to you first. Why is it happening?
I mean, as always, I think there's a number of different reasons. I'm sure that part of this is due to the direction that the party is going, sort of drifting towards the centre and away from the left. You know, we all know that when Jeremy Corbyn became leader, that came on the back of a large sort of inbound movement of lots of people who were slightly more ideologically left than what had come before. I think, you know, when you have a politician like Keir Starmer, whose job is essentially to move a party in one direction away from another that has been rather popular with its own members, you are always going to get that. But I think you've got the slight issue also, the fact that he's not seen, I think, as a particularly incisive leader. You know, he's been very much on the fence on a lot of things, been, you know, sort of lagging behind on a lot of things. He does come across as somebody who is sort of, I suppose, it isn't as inspirational as he could have been. You know, but that's not all to do with. You know, we are in the middle of a parliament, and actually the Labour Party very often drops down in the numbers throughout a parliament ahead of a general election. We do need to remember that it still has more than double the number of members that the Tories have. So I wouldn't say it's all disaster just yet.
Yeah. Dennis McShane, what's going on? I mean, as a Labour Party supporter, which I presume you still are, how alarmed are you?
Not really alarmed. In 1997, there was a very big election win for Labour. A chap, I can't remember his name, Tony somebody or other.
Yeah, he's still in business.
Still in business. And Labour Party membership was smaller than it is today. What happened was that after 2015, the rules were changed to allow anybody to join Labour for £3. And all sorts of interesting people, good people I'm sure, came over dropped out of politics, but they'd started life in the Communist Party, Trotskyist Party, Socialist Workers' Party, and they decided to join Labour for £3 because they got very excited by Jeremy Corbyn. And the membership did go up and up and up until 2019, when suddenly they woke up and realised, hey, this fella Jeremy, he ain't going to win us power. He's not going to win elections. The people will never vote for him. So I'll go back and start reading, you know, The Guardian or the other left papers again and don't have to pay any more membership dues. I think that's roughly what happened. Labour still has more members than all the other parties combined. And if you can find me the Conservative Party membership, I'll take you into the deepest secrets of the Kremlin or the Vatican, because the Tories hide that more than keep that secret more than anything else in the world.
Benedict, it may be a secret, but it's no secret that there is anxiety, whatever the political shade of opinion, whatever the party. Because, you know, thinking of the Tories, famously, what was it, the 1950s, they had 2-3 million members. Then they were happy to talk about how many members they had. And the argument runs, of course, that as you lose that popular support and the money that members bring in, these are expensive things to run, the apparatus of a party. And if you can't get it from voluntary donations, so the argument runs, you get it from government. And a lot of us have a problem with that.
Sure, and I think it's not helped by the fact that Keir Starmer's position on Labour MPs joining picket lines, for example, and what they say about unions at the moment hasn't been quite as vociferous as I think a lot of members would like. Obviously, this is slightly more in the short term, but that's not going to help, I think, a lot of members who are slightly more militant in their views. That it's not going to fill them with confidence. But I do think also, we can sort of look at this and we go, oh, yes, it might mean a shortfall in terms of money, but I don't think the Labour Party is actually in debt or anything like that. It's not in a particularly precarious position. It's not a great position, but nonetheless, one thing that the Tories have certainly found over the last few years is you can drop from millions of members to hundreds of thousands, be that 100,000, be that 200,000, who knows. That doesn't stop you from winning general elections. And the thing is, with most of these people who are leaving the Labour Party, I suspect the next time we do have a general election, the majority will probably not vote Conservative. It would be my hunch.
Dennis McShane, in a sense, in the short term, what matters is money, not members. Mm-hmm. And if you are running the Labour Party's bank account right now, you're thinking, well, we can still tap the trade unions for a bit of money if we can persuade them that we're still on their side. Well, there's probably some high-value donors who suspect we're going to be the next government. We'll ask them for a few bob.
Yes, that's probably the case, and it's not very healthy because nobody gives money without wanting something in exchange. The Conservatives, as we know, were getting all the money from Mr. Putin's oligarchs until suddenly, whoops, Mr. Putin decided to invade Ukraine, and overnight Boris Johnson decided he was anti-Putin. Before that, he turned London into Londongrad and was holding out the begging bowl to Russian oligarchs all the time. Now, that, I think, is bad. I slightly, Colin, disagree with you. I had this argument aside. The government, Robin Cook opposed me, Tony Blair opposed me. I said democracy, on the whole, should pay for democracy. It's how it works in Australia, in Canada, in many European countries. It doesn't work that way in America, where millionaires and billionaires and pressure groups pay for the candidates they want. It doesn't work here, but it's got out of all proportion now. The amount of money the Tories raised with one of their, funny dinner parties or game of tennis with Boris. I'm not sure whether Liz Truss or Rishi, no, let's not kid ourselves, whether Liz actually plays tennis or not, or what her games are. We'll find out. But the first thing she'll do as leader is put out the begging bowl and demand money in exchange for access and influence. So that's unhealthy for all democracy.
Dennis McShane, Benedict Spence, thanks both very much indeed. Thanks for your time. Now, according to some scientists, bees have become increasingly stressed by climate change. They're warning that some species of bees could be lost permanently because of climate change. A rise in temperatures since 1925 has led to the loss of habitat and this is an interesting idea, the development of lopsided wings for the insects. In Britain, certain species of bees could be lost forever. A third of wild bees are said to be already in decline. Anne Robury is president of the British Beekeepers Association in full fig, for which we thank you. Thank goodness it isn't last week when it was as hot as it was. Are we going to do it like this? You're not going to take it off? Okay.
Shall I take the top off so you can see?
It's like wearing a giant COVID face mask.
Yes, it is.
It inhibits clear communication. It's nice to see you. A third in decline, goodness me.
Yes, it's very, very serious, actually. The number of bees in decline. Now, bees include solitary bees and bumblebees, and it's our solitary bees which are really struggling. And our bumblebees, we've already lost several species. And the way in which the climate is going, it is actually impacting on all the bees. The good thing about honeybees is that beekeepers can assist quite a lot to make sure that they can still pollinate our crops and do the things that we really want from them. It is a worry in terms of my bees, for example. Last week, when it was really hot, the temperature was nearly 40 degrees. I covered their hives to make sure the tin roofs weren't too hot for them. And at midday, I looked out, no bees flying. And not one bee came out. The sun was on the hive and it wasn't worth them coming out. I could tell that because basically it is so hot, the flowers aren't giving off any nectar for them. If they don't do that, they can't collect the nectar and make our honey, and they also can't feed their young. And that is so for solitary bees and bumblebees as well. And all of them need to be sort of stacking up ready for the winter.
Yes,
and it's very serious.
And just a couple of thoughts, really. What proportion of pollinators do bees make up? Is it the lion's share of pollinators? And also just that sense in which beekeeping is quite du jour, isn't it? I thought it was very fashionable and there was no shortage of beekeepers.
250 sorts of bumblebees, and of which I think we're losing about 8 so far. That's just a guess. I'm not 100% sure. Solitary bees, flies, butterflies and wasps, all important pollinators. There's only one species of honeybee that we have in this country, Mellifera mellifera, and they make up a very important group because we can transport them to help pollinate crops for farmers.
Yeah.
And so agriculturally, they have a huge value to us. But they are only one group. The reason they're so valuable, they overwinter together and they are ready to go in the spring because as a social group, they've gone through the winter. So it's really important.
Anne Robury is president of the British Beekeepers Association.
Mention one
very
thing?
quickly, Anne, yeah?
Yeah, very quickly, we've got a National Honey Day in October, the 21st, which is actually, please, buy a jar of honey, support our bees and support the local beekeepers. Please, buy a jar of honey.
We'll do our best, Anne. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks very much.
Ada McGee's just joined us. Lucy Johnson's still here. I'm going to make this point. I went to an agricultural show recently and the chap who was there with the hives was saying they found honey from the pyramids, which you could still eat. Can that really be true?
Yeah, I quite like Manuka honey. Apparently that's got a higher percentage of vitamins that diabetic needs, apparently.
Right,
I
OK.
don't know if that's even, supported by the evidence. I think a lot of claims are made.
We digress.
Yeah, we do.
I blame myself. Britain's richest man, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, has said he's interested in buying Manchester United Football Club. Any offer from the billionaire businessman would depend on the American Glazer family selling their entire controlling interest in the Premier League club. The news led to a sharp increase in Man U's share price, up 15% on last week. Ada McGee is, as I say, here. We were talking about Elon Musk suggesting that he might be interested. That was a bit of a spoof, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Jim Ratcliffe is a serious player with serious money.
Yeah, let's consider who he is, first of all. He's 69 years old. He's born in Failsworth, which is just down the road from Old Trafford. He's not really known for for overpaying for businesses, so it would have to be at the right price. But just to correct something you said in the link there, I think the initial stage of investment would be just to take a minority share. That's all that the Glazers are willing to relinquish right now.
Right.
Also,
it's not for sale.
The whole thing isn't for sale. Look, I think, just to broaden the point out, what he said through his representatives last night in the Times was that it would have to be with a view to taking the club, controlling interest in the club long term. So he's not going to be interested in just taking a short-term, piece of it just to own it for a little while. He wants to make money out of it, and Manchester United is easy to make money out of. They don't have to be successful to even make money. This is part of the problem. A lot of their fans are saying, how ambitious are they to achieve success on the pitch when they're already making loads of money off it? Same with Arsenal to some degree.
He's a fascinating character, isn't he? I mean, he's got the money from Ineos, his chemicals business. Didn't he buy Team Sky, the cycling team?
He did indeed, yes. He bought that. That was in 2018. He bought that, but he's also got a control. Well, he owns Nice, which is
Nice, not Paris Saint-Germain.
Yeah, with in France. Yes, they're not going to challenge PSG for the title anytime soon, but they are making some interesting signings. Kasper Schmeichel, for example, from Leicester. So he does have a little bit of knowledge on the football front in terms of transfers and recruitment, that kind of thing. But it's a different level when you're talking about Manchester United. The other problem is that the Glazers value that stake. This stock exchange last night valued at about 1.85 billion. The Glazers are thought to believe it's worth closer to 3 or 4 billion. So they're a bit wide apart in terms of what it's actually worth, and they're going to be difficult people to wrest the club from. I mean, they've been involved since 2005. The first 10 years, or the first 8 years, certainly you can argue, was pretty successful on the pitch. But when I was in Manchester working and covering that club and following it all around the world, my understanding was that the whole thing would fall apart when Sir Alex Ferguson moved on, and it proved absolutely correct. I didn't believe that. I thought this is just too commercially powerful to fail, too big to fail. But as I say, where they failed on the pitch, they've not failed commercially. It's still huge draw for any kind of investor.
No club has a God-given right to be at the top of the pile. You look at Barcelona are struggling at the moment, aren't they? So
they are, but they've done quite an interesting financing deal which is predicated on future TV rights, which no one's really done before, but it's interesting.
Well, no, they have done. Aidan Leeds did it, unfortunately, my team.
Oh, they did, yeah, that's
We
true.
know where that
Future Champions League places, isn't it? That's right.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. Aidan, thanks very much indeed, Aidan McGee there. Michelle Dewberry's up next to talk about what's coming up on the show. Michelle.
Colin, yes, another day, more strikes. I wonder, are people fed up of them yet or still supporting them? I want to talk about the politics behind them as well. Should the government be more involved, well, I say more, involved at all in the conversations about pay and conditions, etc., or not? I want to look at Labour Party. Are they still the party for the workers? They're not allowed on picket lines, but some of them are doing it. I also want to look today at A-level results. University, more kids than ever going to university. Is it really worth it though, Colin? I say no, unless, of course, you want to be a brain surgeon or something like that. What else? Oh, yes. Who is responsible for helping the most vulnerable in society? Is it as simple, Colin, as just saying the government? What about business? Should they do more? What about, dare I say it, us as a collective society helping one another? Where does the book stop?
Yeah, that's a really... remember the Big Society, David Cameron's Big Society?
I do. Yeah. It wasn't very successful, though, was it?
Well, no. Michelle, thanks very much indeed. Michelle Dewberry coming up at 6 o'clock. Lucy Johnston's been our guest today. We're not going to talk about the Big Society, that's for sure. We are going to talk about masks, because you have started quite an email firestorm with your monologue saying we shouldn't be looking at them again, as Tony Blair urges us to. Remind us of what, in summary, your argument against them is?
Well, why? There's no good evidence that mask mandates make any difference, and there's plenty of evidence that they do cause harm to people in all sorts of ways, socially and even in terms of spreading infection. So we have proper trials across communities that show they don't make any difference. So if there are small, poorly controlled studies, PORCA studies that show they may slow spread, that isn't played out in the real world.
OK. Lucy Johnston, really enjoyed having you in the studio today, and we'll see you again soon, I'm sure, and I do hope. Aidan McGee, thanks too. Thanks very much indeed. Michelle Dewberry's up next with all the day's news. Do stay with us.
Hi there, Aidan McGivern here with the latest forecast. Cloudy for many of us today, and it is fairly damp at the moment for northern and western parts of the country. The rain sinks southeast overnight and turns to showers as it crosses the country. But there is currently a series of weather fronts straddling the UK, moving in, tied into an area of low pressure that is anchored to the northwest of the UK. And those weather fronts bringing a lot of cloud and some steady and at times heavy rain for parts of Wales and northwest England during the early part of the evening. That rain then pushes into the southwest of England, the Midlands, and later turns up into the southeast. Clearing skies behind the rain, but for parts of central and western Scotland, Northern Ireland, further showers. 9 to 12 Celsius in the north, a fresh night here. Still quite warm in the southeast, 17 Celsius, and a lot of cloud to start the day on Friday. In fact, some of this showery rain could pep up and give a thunderstorm perhaps for a time during Friday morning. It does clear though, and then by lunchtime for much of the southern half of the UK it's sunny spells, light winds as well, and feeling pleasant in that sunshine with temperatures up to 24 to 26 Celsius. A cooler feel, I think, for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Sunny spells and showers, a fresh breeze and temperatures in the high teens. But many of these showers die away through the evening. Clear spells then for many for the first part of the night, but it won't take long before, well, the next area of low pressure and some weather fronts reach the far northwest. So for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, the winds pick up overnight. Coastal gales for Western Scotland, some heavy rain